Hi everyone, my name is Jeremy. On this channel I talk about color and light, and today I have a special guest. A friend, Ben, reached out to me and he has a really fascinating topic that we want to have a conversation about how color theory and music theory actually kind of overlap. And it's just a fascinating topic, so I'm just going to record this conversation. So I'd like to introduce you to Ben. And Ben, I know we chatted a little bit briefly before, but just having this conversation again, it's such a fascinating topic to me because I'm a musician and I'm an artist, and I care a lot about both music theory and color theory. The way I learned music was through theory rather than just learning to play notes. So I can't read music. I learned by chords and understanding the flow of chords. And so the understanding of color theory kind of has a similar thing. Like, I want to understand light and the way light actually interacts so that I can use that for my art. And yeah, tell me more about your theories here.
Yeah, so I've always been interested in colour and how it works, and kind of frustrations as a child of not being able to mix the right colours. And I sort of have a growing interest in music. I play guitar, and I think the fact that you mentioned chords are harmony. They're a combination of different frequencies, and they sound pleasing together, and you can say different things with them. They can be have tension or be calm, and all sorts of things. So I've got an interest in both colour and music and light. And I was listening to a musician called Jacob Collier, who is a British musician from North London. He's a bit of a genius and understands kind of harmony in a way that's kind of really new. And I was listening, he's brilliant at talking about it. So I was listening to him talk about harmony, and I noticed while he was talking about it that he wears an outrageous selection of colours. Yes. And his clothes just have patterns on it and almost too many colours. But he talks about in his music that the more notes that you have, the sort of greater responsibility you have, and how it's difficult to do and difficult to combine them. And so the sort of question occurred to me is, does he understand colour in the same way that he understands music, and is it possible to do so? And I've kind of concluded that he doesn't understand colour in the way that he understands music, because, well, he may do. He may have but it's so outrageous what he does. So he may do in a sense, but it started me down a path of, can I apply the theory and the mathematics that's in music to colour? Because the current sort of model of talking about harmony in colour is sort of that, you've got your red, green, blue colour wheel, and then you've got cyan, magenta and yellow in between, and then it's almost just the opposite sides are complementary, and then you kind of had the triads, and you can have analogous, but it feels fitting, but I didn't feel that it works necessarily. I didn't understand it particularly, other than I have to go and look at the colour wheel and pick the colours, but I didn't feel necessarily that they matched what I liked or anything like that. So I started to kind of explore those things. So I've done lots of maths, and I've done lots of things to kind of merge the two. But to do that, I had to understand music harmony first. So in music, kind of notes that go together are harmonies, and you have to kind of start with understanding that notes are just frequencies of sound, and the slower the frequency, the lower the sound, and the higher frequency, the higher the sound, and we all have an intrinsic understanding of the way harmony goes, and we have it from really quite young. You start to sort of sing in tune when you're about 4 or 5 years old, even younger. So it starts like when you sing a note, and someone's singing in tune with you. Everyone's heard someone singing out of tune, like a karaoke, yeah. or you can just hear it. You can even hear it with professional, like pop stars. Sometimes you think, oh, that was a duff note, and it hurts a little bit in your head. And so the way to think about that is, when someone's singing in tune, what they're doing is that they're matching your notes. So if you're singing, say, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, you're singing a frequency, right? And if you could sort of see your voice boxes slow it down, it would be sort of vibrating, and you'd hear a thud if you slowed it down really slowly. So if you're singing that first note of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and someone joins in with you, they're actually matching your frequency. And if they're out of tune, they're actually it falls out of sync, right? And
Right.
kind of like if you saw a frequency of like two flashing lights, like at a traffic stop for traffic lights, they'd be in sync and you think, oh yeah, they're in sync, and then suddenly they fall out, and it's kind of just annoying when patterns don't match. And I think we're good at recognizing that. So someone singing in tune is matching a frequency. More interesting than that, I think, is when you're singing, if you've got a low register. So at school, I'm a teacher of young children. So if I'm singing, say, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, in my register of like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, I'm singing at a lower frequency than the children, but they're singing in tune with me. And I think that's interesting. What they're doing is that their brains are doubling your frequency, which is amazing. So I'm singing Twinkle, Twinkle, and they're singing up at like Twinkle, Twinkle. They're singing up there, right? So I don't know how the brain does it, but what I imagine it does is sort of sees the pattern. So what that pattern would be, you're singing the first note, and they're singing at double the frequency. So if I do like 1, 1, 1, this has to do 1, 2, and it goes like this. And that's what their vocal cord is doing, which is really interesting, and it's a pleasing pattern, and it actually sort of sounds like drum beats, right? Like like any kind of pop music, right? So that's what they're doing. But those aren't traditionally thought as harmonies in music. Someone singing in tune with you is not necessarily harmonising, and a child singing with you isn't harmonising. It is a harmony, but you don't necessarily talk about it that way. A harmony in music is two frequencies that kind of have an interaction with each other, but they're not in sync. The most common one is called a fifth. You recognise it as it's the first two notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So it's the jump from C, Twinkle, Twinkle, or it could be, but you can do it from anywhere, but it will have a fifth note. It's the fifth note in the major scale, or any kind of note you start from, it will be the fifth note. But what it really is, that name's kind of misleading in a way, is it's a frequency that's 1.5 times faster. So if you relative to that frequency, so whatever frequency you start at, the second one is 1.5 times faster than that. Now that's interesting as rhythm to play, and it's now sort of musicians are kind of getting into this idea because it's called a polyrhythm, which is it's not double the frequency or half the frequency or anything like that. What it is 1.5 times faster. So the way to kind of play that would be to find a number in here that you can multiply by 1.5. So it would be 1, 2, 1, 2. And if you take 2, multiply by 1.5, you get to 3. So this has to play 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, while this is playing 1, 2. And it sounds like this. If I remember how to play it, is. And you can hear the pattern, right? And it's going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And so it's kind of hard to get your head around, but you kind of recognise it almost sounds like an animal's feet, or like a horse galloping or something like that. You don't hear it in Western music very often, but it's kind of in like it's in lots of other cultures that have more complicated rhythms than we do. It's in those, they have those rhythms and they have all sorts of complicated things going on. So 1.5 times faster is a really pleasing and very common harmony. The other one, the next most common one, is called a major third. And a major third is the first note of Mary Had a Little Lamb compared to its first one. So it's this one, which is like it's used it's so common. It's used all around the world as a thing. It just sounds pleasing, like in in Graceland and the choir that sang in that, in Beatles music, in the Beach Boys. It's used in everything all the time, as opposed to a minor one, which sounds a bit more discordant. But what those two are that second note is 1.25 times faster. Now that's even harder to play, and it's slightly less simple, which is you have to find another note. With this time, you'd have to time something by 1.25. So if you find 4 in this rhythm, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, this one has to be 1.5 times faster, which would be 6. So you have to now play 6 for every 4, which is slightly hard to play, and you have to think about it, which it goes like this. And you can hear the repetition again. And I think this is essentially what our brain is probably just finding something pleasing. It's almost looking for a pattern, right? And then it settles on it. So people who are harmonizing really well, like a barbershop quartet or something, with their brains are sort of sinking into these pleasing combinations of sound. And I think that's kind of why music works. I think we need to be thinking about colour in the same way, and how these things match.
Well, that's the fascinating part. I know we had talked, earlier briefly. It's that our brains look for patterns, and so we will want to make a lot of assumptions. We look at something. That's why we draw stick figures. That's why we do line art. We're trying to take a really complicated thing and bring it down. And there's something about pattern recognition that is part of who we are as a species. And that's how we thrive. That's how we interact with the world, is looking for patterns. Playing games is one of those things too. Taking things and reorganizing it. And it's just like there's something in our DNA that wants us to have structure, and we love music. It's innate in our soul. So it only makes sense to me that music and color they're both wavelengths of a sort, and they're patterns. And so it makes sense, yeah.
So I think essentially at the moment, and I don't mean to sort of be too bit arrogant to dismiss all colour theory at the moment, but I think essentially at the moment it doesn't think quite in that way, and it doesn't have the same nuance and complexity that music does. You think how complicated music is, and the harmonies and the way Mozart and Beethoven, these people that apply hugely complex ways of thinking about harmony, and then ours and then colour, ours as artists, colour artists. It's just the opposite side. It feels overly simple. But as a way to start thinking about, I think we automatically think in this way, is like, as a way of thinking about it, is like, have you ever seen anybody wearing a colour combination of clothes that feels a little bit like this? Oh, sorry. Where it just hurts a little bit, Or you've put on a jumper and some trousers and you think, those don't go.
Those don't match at all.
They nearly match. Like, you've got a red and a nearly red, and you think that's too close. I should go for a completely different colour, or one, again, conversely, one that just feels it just sort of goes. You think, that's a beautiful combination of colours, and you don't know why. And I think I'm sort of suggesting this is why, that actually the way they. The reason it's pleasing is because of the frequency difference and the way they're interacting with each other. So that's what I'm suggesting.
What I love about this is that there's so much talk about color theory and there's so much talk about music theory, but rarely is the conversation about how they really do match, and they do come together.
And I think at least why I think I've not found it before, someone may have done this, but this is just my exploration. The reason I think I've come across this is actually I'm more interested in colour than I am music here. There's plenty of people who apply colour to music. Like, I've got like a child xylophone has a rainbow on it, but they kind of just put it kind of just randomly on. Essentially, the colours are out of tune. It'd be like two instruments that are just not tuned in with each other because they've just sort of randomly placed it on, because they're thinking more about how can I make music easier through colour. But I don't think people say, how do I make colour easier through music? And so that's what I'm interested in. I want to understand colour more than I want to understand music. So that's why I think this someone may have done it other than me, but I haven't seen it. And I was, trying to find somebody, and that's partly why I found you, just looking for people who know about colour and exploring it that way. But yeah.
Yeah, this is so fascinating. Yeah, so for anybody listening, we don't claim to be the full experts on this. If you know of links, tell us. I would love to learn more. It's all about exploring.
I present this humbly and actually to see what people think of it, because I'm just exploring it and I'm just at the beginning of this exploration. But I think it's something interesting. It's sort of discovering something natural rather than I'm not inventing it. It's just, I think, I found some maths that's interesting that applies to this and is potentially true, or
right. I mean, to me, this is the lifelong pursuit as an artist, is that it's not like you learn how to do something, the end. Art and music, it's one of those things that like it's easy to get into and it takes a lifetime to master, and you never quite master it. If we were eternal, we would never master it. It's just the joy of that learning and exploring and asking questions. I'm constantly in my career looking outside of my own industry to go, what can I learn? if I'm working in animation, what can I learn from live action? And then if I'm in live action, what can I learn from gaming? And what can I learn from architecture? What can I learn from theme parks? There's so many different areas and kind of branching out. What can I learn from traditional painting? And music, the same thing. Like, yeah, anything to just like explore and understand the world easier, because my brain needs something to lock into, which is what makes your theory so fascinating.
So we're going to kind of applying it and showing you how it works with colour. So, but the things to remember are the maths of like one and one, a frequency and its exact frequency, right? It'd be in a colour sense, it's like I've got a red jumper and I've got red trousers. Like they're just the same, exactly the same, not slightly off, but exactly the same. Possibly darker or lighter, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But the same. So there's the one and one, which is like two people singing in tune. Double, it's interesting because it doesn't exist in colour, but we'll talk about it in a second. 1.5 times faster, which I think is the most significant, and then 1.25. And the missing number in this sequence of 1.25, 1.5 is 1.75. And just briefly, that one is fascinating in music because it doesn't fully exist, because it nearly exists, but that's to do with the tuning and the kind of compromise music had to make it work so you could jump around and create a singular scale, a singular piano. And I think we have to make a similar compromise in colour too, interestingly enough. So I'll come to that. So what I'll show you is the kind of a colour wheel that I've created that's based on this maths, and then the compromises and how that might be applied. And I've done some paintings sort of just on Procreate to kind of how that might be applied into a painting as well, to kind of show you what it looks like. And I think that's particularly fascinating as well. So I'll jump into my screen. Let's see what I can do. Screen share my screen. This is sort of a colour wheel. Now what I've done is I've made a colour wheel of 16 colours, and I've done that for sort of quite a mathematical reason actually. This thing called the harmonic series, which is this mathematical equation to do with when frequencies double, essentially how you then divide it up. So what I've done is I've picked red as my first colour, right, on my colour wheel. And the reason I picked that is because that's the slowest frequency we see. So we have 3 senses in our eyes. The red is the slowest, right? We have green and we have blue as well. So red is the slowest frequency. Now, we can't see double red. But interestingly enough, there are some creatures that can. And I believe it's some moths, or possibly all moths, and also some birds. So they have a 4th sensor in their eyes. So they have the same as us, red, green and blue, and then they have another one. And I believe it can see double. It might even be precisely on double that frequency. So it's interesting. So they see this double red, and I'd love to know what that felt like. You can see a red rose, but you also can see double it on top. Would it be similar to our experience of singing with a child? It's just this. It feels the same, but kind of more somehow, or higher, or anyway. So red is that one frequency. So just for a second, I'm going to draw on it on here. Just a 1 to show you kind of to put that number there. So that's right. If that's 1, that's your sort of lowest frequency, and then relative to that, a colour that's 1.5 times faster. And just take a moment for anyone watching to think about what colour would feel like that. Because I found one, and when I found out what it was, I was like, yeah, of course it is. Of course it's that colour. It feels comfortable to me, right? So just kind of think about that while I can bring it up. And then it's really interesting as to what it is, I think, because it works and also it's interesting. So the colour that's 1.5 is blue. Just full on blue. Your other sensor is blue, and then you start to jump in your brain as to where do I see that colour combination, and you think that's actually really familiar to me, and you have a second to think about kind of what that is, and the first thing that jumps to me is of course the British flag, but then the US flag, and then my favourite superhero as a kid was like Spider-Man, but then Superman, and then you think, well, is that just a coincidence, or are people just, they find that combination exciting because of their frequency interaction Or is it, I don't know, those pigments were easy to find? Or, but so many of the world's flags are those colours. I mean, they might have just been copying the British. I don't know, but
Right.
but I find it really, really common. It's it's quite common in logos as well, in design. Like the Pepsi one is not quite exactly those two hues, but very, very close. I'm sure there's other ones as well, but it's really common. So I find that absolutely fascinating. So that's. Let's see if I can look, 1.5, right? Then you're filling out the 1.25, and this is where you go, this is a bit insane that this is true.
Yes.
I'll just to kind of be upfront with the math that I did here, was that the maths in the end, to get these colours, there was a website I found where you could choose the wavelength, which works in a slightly inverse way, so but essentially I converted it. So these colours are precisely worked out. They're not just picked from a colour wheel. They're taken from their exact wavelength and then placed there. So the one that's 1.25 is fascinating because it completes a really interesting thing, which is green. Now, everyone recognises that if you know anything about technology. Those are the ones in our screens, right? You zoom into any screen, it's RGB. But it's also exactly our three senses in our eyes. And as soon as I realised that, someone must have written about that before, but I didn't realise it, that the three senses in our eyes not only have three different frequencies, but they have a mathematical relationship to each other. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. And for me, it made me feel like, I'm really onto something here in terms of... so that's... Oh, God, I've changed to a silly pen. They're just, they have a mathematical relationship. I don't know why they do. It doesn't feel necessary, like, to just distinguish between colours. They could have had any kind of relationship, but they have an exact mathematical relationship. So I think that's really interesting. I don't know about you. I don't know if you've got anything to say about why you think that is. I don't know.
It's just interesting, the patterns, the way our brains interpret things, that the connection between music and color, this blew my mind of like, of course it's those three colors.
But it's the chemistry involved. They're all, I presume they're like chemical photo reactions. I don't know. I mean, but the fact is, this has been built this way. I mean, whatever your theological or philosophical beliefs related to that we have an eye that's built around a mathematical pattern. And I find that so interesting.
Yeah, very.
Yeah. And now, again, here's the missing thing, right? So all of those, the fact that our eye has the same... a chord, essentially, like you started with talking about music, of this chord, which is really familiar. It has that chord. Everyone knows that chord. It's played all the time. It's like the first thing in Sister Act 2 when Whoopi Goldberg is playing chords to teach her choir is this. Right? So it's the first thing you learn as a thing in music is that chord. And in colour has the same. Now, of course, there's a glaring gap on this, which is, and this is where we get into sort of it gets even more intriguing and problematic, is blue is the fastest sensor we have, and technically the highest colour we can see, sort of. Because if you fill that in, it's essentially fill those in with the colours that, when red and green sensors pick up, they can see all those colours in between. But there's colours missing on there, which is, of course, the end of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Now, this was so interesting when I thought about this as to, hang on a minute, how can we see a faster frequency than blue, even though blue is the fastest frequency that a sensor we have? And it's because of a really interesting thing, which is our red sensor starts to pick up on some faster frequencies. So it peaks at this sort of particular range, and then as it goes round into high frequencies, it starts to get excited again. And the reason it starts to get excited and send messages to our brain is because it's beginning to approach double its frequency, like an adult singing with a child. So it's responding to harmony. That sensor is, which is really interesting. But the problem is it drops off and it can't reach its double. I have heard that some people can see that a little bit better and see a bit further, interestingly. And I imagine that's their red sensor being a bit more sensitive somehow, or something like that. But this is where we kind of fill in the gap, and we haven't talked about this yet, but the thing that bothers me because I work in education of when learning colour theory and they learn things, children learn it, is that they learn the primary colours as red, yellow and blue, of which as artists, and if you've worked with any kind of digital things, you know that there's missing cyan and magenta, and they are the true sort of primary colours of paint and print. You need cyan and you need magenta, and it's not in the rainbow. And I find that fascinating. So magenta particularly is not a visible wavelength or frequency of light to us. We can't. That's why it doesn't appear in the rainbow. But we can see it, which is interesting. There are magenta flowers, right? And there's magenta paint. So my kind of thing when I was thinking, how do I finish this colour wheel if I'm constantly if I'm talking about frequencies? So I was thinking, where would magenta be? And I was thinking, well, it must be in that gap. That makes sense. But I couldn't mathematically put it in. So then I was thinking about it, and then looking at violet, and I was thinking, well, I need an extra thing. Clicked on violet, looked at it in its kind of its value, and in its value over here, and thinking, well, hang on a minute, if I just brighten that, that's magenta. Magenta is violet. They're the same colour, they're the same hue. Violet is just dark magenta. And I didn't realise that until I was sort of thinking about how do I talk about this on your channel without and explaining it. So we do see magenta. I thought it is a wavelength of light. It's just we're not seeing it very well, like we're a little bit deaf to it. It's like our ears can't quite hear a sound. Our eyes can't quite pick it up. So what I did here, I've got a layer called Visible Light Plus, as if our red sensor could pick it up, and it fills it into with this, and I find that really interesting. So the colours below it, I've just taken them up to their full brightness. I haven't changed any hue, haven't changed any values other than brightness, which is the other sensors getting, but sort of bringing up the other sensors. But it's it brings it up, which is really interesting. And then you can easily then fill in the gap. I've had to sort of approximate it, but there's not there's only 3 steps there. But you can finish then the colour wheel, which is there. So you've now got your 1.75, you've got your full scale. Right, so this is, I need a white one, so that's 1.75. Right, so that fills your colour wheel. But there's a problem here, which you think, right, now I can harmonise everything. It's like complementary colours. Blue is a complementary to red. But then you think, well, what's complementary to blue? And you think, it must be red. If blue's complementary to red, red must be complementary to blue. It must be it's 1.5. But then you do the maths, which is if you take blue, which essentially here has a measure of 1.5, you times that by 1.5, you don't get to red, which is really annoying. So I've got a colour wheel that doesn't work.
It's like it's a spiral rather than a circle.
Exactly.
It's slightly offset.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a really simple way to think about it on a keyboard is if I go... But if I go from that second note up to then play Twinkle Twinkle Little... That second note isn't... it isn't C, it isn't the same one I started with. So essentially here, it's if you take blue and you times it by 1.5, sounds a silly thing to do, but is you get to yellow. So you jump round slightly further because 1.5 times 1.5 actually gets to, I forget what number it is, but it jumps to the value of yellow there. So I'll show you that kind of in another way, which is, so I've done the two colour wheels here, which is, so I've got the one on the left, which is one I just did, where you take red, you multiply it 1.5, and here's blue. Now here's a slight kind of leap I've had to make, which is you can't times blue by 1.5 because we can't see that high, but you can actually jump down to a fifth in music as well. So I've actually gone from blue. It is 1.5, but it's actually the sort of it's 1.5. And then halved. so it's kind of like going on a keyboard from twinkle, twinkle, but actually to go to twinkle, twinkle, little star. So I kind of jumped down.
You've changed keys.
I've changed keys.
You basically,
I've changed octave. So here,
octaves,
these two colour wheels are different keys. but I've jumped down to get to the 1.5. But the maths works, and anyone can look it up. I'll put up the kind of the spreadsheet that I've made of this as to why and how I got to the number. But it's all mathematically worked out. But look at these two colour wheels, because there's some really interesting things going on, which is mainly look at the placement of blue and red, because they're not opposite each other on the one on the right side.
Well, they have dominant colors. Like if you look at the one that has the blue centric, like in the key of blue,
exactly.
There's much more green in
exactly,
this and much less red.
Yeah.
Versus in the key of red has a lot more of the warm colors.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating combination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. Here's the thing that hundreds of years ago, music had the same problem, right? So what they were doing is they realised they couldn't create a singular scale where you could play in tune. You could jump from one note to the other and jump the same amount of jumps and kind of figure it out and work there. And for a long while, and this is the reason, by the way, why you have black and white notes and sharps and flats, is because they were trying to tune to a starting note harmonically so it sounded beautiful. But then when they tried to play it in a different key, start from a black note or another note, it sounded awful. Because of this visual representation right here, they don't. If you were like in a sort of universe of red, and mathematical universe of red, but it doesn't translate to another one. So what they had to do was basically, I don't know if this is an American word here, but bodge it. where it's a British term, where they had to sort of shoehorn into one that works for everyone, but not very well.
Right.
And they did that, but they did it in a very elegant in a way. And what they did was not divide it by 16, but divide it by 12. So there's 12 notes on a piano. And what you can do is jump around all the notes very elegantly by jumping to the fifths. So jumping to the 1.5s. So if I go from red to blue, blue to yellow, blue to its fifth, and if you do that, it takes you 12 moves to get back to the first colour. So if I go from, and I'll show you the colour wheel that does this, is you do 12 jumps and you end up back at the start. So mathematically, that's just what happens, like a sort of spirograph. I don't know if you have that toy in America, but
I love spirographs.
Yeah, so you jump from one to the other. So I ended up taking the actual frequencies of the piano, working out the ratios, and then applying that to colour. So it's not quite the harmonies, but it's close enough, just in the way music has settled. And what I ended up with was this colour wheel. Now, the reason I've got dark and light here is because I'll show you in a minute an animation, which is to somehow show the idea of double the frequencies. So you got dark rates to light rates, an octave of music. So this is a colour wheel based on 12, which is, it's a little bit more familiar actually in terms of kind of rainbow of red, orange, yellow, green. There's a couple of greens on there. There's a few blues, but it's kind of more familiar, I think, because there's less steps. But I'll show you some animations that I've done with this and kind of how this works. So let's jump to photos. So these different animations, this is kind of me matching music with colour so that you can sort of demonstrate how it works. So this first one is like the scale of a piano, going up the octaves, going through each notes, and each colour is ratio is the same as on a piano. So watch this. It's cool, isn't it?
It's amazing, yeah.
I love it. It took me ages to do that because I have absolutely no programming skills. I had to literally.
So you did that manually, like in After Effects?
I had to do that manually. It took me absolutely forever. It's because I'm not very good at that kind of stuff. But so that's that one. And now the next one is interesting because this is the kind of the system that music uses to basically navigate and tune itself, which is it's called the circle of fifths. It's actually a sort of a star of fifths, really, a sort of 12-sided star, and it jumps between every single note to its fifth, to its next fifth, to its next fifth. They all sound. It's weird because it sounds like the notes aren't moving, but they're all the same mathematical relationship, and I think it creates some beautiful combinations of colours. So watch this. This one. I find that really interesting to see, because you see some sort of familiar ones and then some ones that you've never seen before, and it kind of reminds me of the experience. I don't know if you were not that dissimilar in age, I don't think, but I don't know if you remember on computers when you first time you saw the full sort of whatever million colour wheel.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind at the time, just thinking, I've never seen those colours before. But here's some combinations that are beautiful, but I don't think I've quite seen them in that way before. But there's some really familiar ones. So you've got the red and blue, right? So they're 1.5 apart. Red being the sort of key and blue being 1.5. But then blue and yellow. So I find that interesting that at the moment the whole complementary thing is reds and blue are complementary to each other, and there's no other combination that are complementary. But this says red and blue is complementary to red, but yellow is complementary to blue, and pink is complementary to yellow. So you've got more movement, I think here than kind of current colour theory, and more combinations, right? But they're all familiar to me. Like in our brief chat before, when you saw some of this, you in movies, you have a better knowledge of movie of where you see these combinations. For me, that says Star Wars, right? It's the lightsabers, but also blue and yellow is really combination. Again, it's like Wolverine, and purple and yellow is an interesting one. It kind of works for me. I can't think where I've seen it, but it kind of works. Green and purple is beautiful. See that? Yeah, exactly, yeah. And then that one I like because I don't see that kind of pink colour very often, so the fact that it's with that bright green works. Of course, you could desaturate all of these and bright, and see them in that way, in a sort of more subtle, like Blade Runner wouldn't have these colours, right? But they might be using them, but far, desaturated. That one, I love that combination. I don't know why, those two I find beautiful. But again, you look at the really bright elements of those, and that's baby pink and baby blue, which is interesting that as culturally we've arrived at that combination of possibly incorrectly, but the sort of, you see them as those reveal parties of a blue balloon bursting or whatever it is. So it's blue for a boy and pink for a girl, which is I disagree with, but it's kind of, the fact that combination exists is interesting. Blue and orange is quite common and quite beautiful. I don't know why this makes me think of Scotland, and I don't know why. I must have seen it on the Scottish rugby kit or something. Blue and green. Interestingly enough, these ones of purple, orange and green are a kind of major triad, and that is the Halloween colours. I don't know, certainly in this country, which is really interesting. That kind of, my daughter randomly said, I don't know, she's just listening to me, she said, my favourite colours are purple, orange and green. I went to look it up, and it's a major triad. But she just happened to say that, so I'm sure it's coincidence. But yeah, I just find those really interesting. Anyone go back on this video can go and look through those combinations and just see, have I seen that before? Or do you find them pleasing? I mean, I find them all very striking, certainly.
I think that this whole thing just gives a little bit more subtlety to, color theory is theory. But this is the practical of what is appealing to us, and seeing more depth to it. As when I think of music, I just listen to the music. I don't think of it being, really exact. I had said in our conversation before, I had seen a short film. It's a Academy Award winning short film called The Stutterer. And this character can't speak very clearly, but he does articulate in the film, and I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but something to the essence of, music is the brain's way of counting without knowing you're counting.
Yeah.
And just the beauty of that. And I think when I listen to music, it's really, really complicated patterns of frequencies. But because they work in such harmony with one another, it's just appealing to us as a human species. We just all can listen to it. But we don't have to struggle to go, that's the math behind it. And I think the same is with color, that when we see these patterns, we're like, that's just really appealing. Like a painting that has that right balance of all of these tones, colors, hues, saturation levels, finds these harmonies that just feels right. And you can see other pieces of art, you're like, oh no, there's dissonance in that. It might be technically correct, but it's just, ugh.
And that's you. Yeah. And those things can be useful, right? So you could deliberately want that, and that could be, that could be a thing. And there's a famous, it's more not quite along the lines, but it was a Turner who's such a fantastic British painter, but from a long time ago. But his thing, when he used black in a painting, and that doesn't. Black and grey and white are interesting in this theory, but but using something that just kind of was considered wrong to do, but he used it, and he used it on purpose, to kind of, to do with death and things like that, but deliberately using the wrong thing. I mean, that certainly is a jazz thing, right? Throwing in a note that feels awkward, but deliberately, and you can do it to show movement. You can do it to create tension, and then and then kind of resolve that tension. That's where the art starts to come in. I mean, here's another one. This leads in beautifully. This other animation, which was. It's the introduction, first kind of few chords of a Jacob Collier song, and it's really interesting, I think, to watch, because then you really start to feel the aesthetics of it and how artistically it works, which is interesting. I mean, there's a lot to unpack with those kind of chords, but it starts with a really simple combination of just that's a major triad right there, and then he adds in a little that's called a major seventh that he adds there, and then this kind of crazy chord. I don't even really know what it is, but it looks beautiful. And it sounds beautiful.
I want to have this lamp that does this automatically.
Well,
like when you play music through it.
Well, this is the thing, and I think ultimately I should hopefully send it to Jacob Collier at some point, because I think he has these wonderful instruments that kind of play harmonies from his voice, and he plays a keyboard and he sings a harmony, and it makes that sound with his keyboard. It's really clever. It's called a harmonizer that somebody invented for him. But in his background, he could have a color wheel, right? That is showing the color of his harmony, right, and the relationships. And I think it would really add to what he does, and I think he loves colour enough, but that'll be for another time. But yeah, I think that starts to show that. But ultimately in all of this, I didn't really necessarily want it to be a representation of music. It's just more kind of examples of hopefully showing the fact that there's something in it and that it works. So what else have I got here that's kind of interesting with it? So this one, with this colour wheel I created, so this is the music colour wheel. In a way that it's the same number of steps as the Western musical scale. Other cultures have more steps, which is interesting. Some have less in kind of choirs. They don't necessarily have the minor third and all sorts of things. But so there's 12 steps, and then there's kind of the octaves. And what I did with it was, it's kind of just all colours. It looks like the Apple one, right? The Apple spinning pizza of doom. But is to create then a useful palette out of this. How does this work? So what I did was, this kind of mask layer removes all the colours that don't harmonically go with it, with the thing called the harmonic series, which is this kind of explanation of how notes harmonise, and all basically the maths that all the instruments make it and our voice makes it, but the notes that go together are kind of from the harmonic series. This I've kind of removed the middle circle, but you can put it back just to see what are the kind of core saturated colours. But here's, I'll go through all the different combinations because I think they're really cool. So this is, at the top is your key colour, and then your one down here, this is the sort of fifth, the blue, the red and the blue, and then the other ones sort of appear, they do harmonise, but you'd use them less often, or you'd use them more delicately.
Like using a seventh note in
exactly.
a chord.
Yeah, you wouldn't
it complements, but not completely.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to throw it in as your loudest one, but go through all these combinations because I think it's kind of beautiful. So each feels full, feels complete, but a different universe, which I really like. Of course, you could desaturate all of these. So kind of a lime green is your key colour. Green, kind of full saturated green is your green colour. Kind of close to a cyan colour. Blue and orange, I don't know, I find that really beautiful. Yeah. Blue and yellow, it seems familiar. I mean, maybe I've just looked at them that, but they seem right. And that's kind of what I'm hoping is true here. I find this last one the most beautiful one for some reason. I find that beautiful. I don't know why. Especially if I move this middle bit. I just find this combination stunning. I don't know why that particularly. So that's the kind of a useful colour wheel, ways of creating palettes out of this. And of course you could, I don't have a desaturation layer on this, but to just removing the saturation you could do, or darken, lighten them, all sorts of things. So I created some paintings. A while ago I did a meadow of flowers with kind of colours of light. In fact, I've got it on the wall over there. I don't know if I could show it, but But looking at it, it's exactly what I've done. So this is a painting, right? So I just did it on Procreate, but I did the key colour green. So I've got up this reference, right? So your key colour's green. I've made the background green, and then any flower on top is a harmony picked from that colour wheel. Can you see that? You can see the reference images, right? Yeah, which enough, those are colours of flowers, and probably that's why the flowers are those colours, because they go on top of green very well, and they jump out of green. That you can distinguish.
Draw nature, yes,
because they're trying to draw attention, right? That's the point of flowers. So that that's it looks like a meadow, right? And all I've done is picked the colours from essentially the harmony, the harmonic series. Then I thought it would be interesting. It looks familiar and it looks comfortable. But then I did one with, well, what if I choose a different key? What if I start with a different colour? So I did a blue one. And I think this looks really cool. So I did blue as my colour. And then the colours on top are the colours in the... Have I got my reference up? Right. Oh, yeah, so blue's my reference colour. What I've done, I've darkened it. I haven't changed the hue of the blue, just a dark and light. It looks a bit purple, interesting enough, but it is that blue, dark light, and then yellow's your fifth, your 1.5, and then a bit of your 1.25 over there, and I put a little bit of the 1.75, but I try not to use it too much. So this is kind of practically how that might work, and I think that's what it looks like. It looks like a deep sea kind of, like a... Right. Yeah, like a...
little lights in there?
An anglerfish is light. I bet an anglerfish's light is pure yellow. Is it an anglerfish, the one with the little dangly light in front of it?
In front of it?
Yeah. The one in Finding Nemo. So, yeah, I think that's really cool. I tried a red one just to see. I mean, this is more, you could use this. This is more uncomfortable. I think it's maybe because it's starting with red. And it goes a bit brown. I don't know whether I've desaturated it too much. But it's interesting. It's interesting that I think this doesn't work at the moment, but it's probably because red's quite an alarming colour to do a painting with. It's kind of like a blood colour, But yeah, it's more of a kind of practical thing of what would paintings look like if you were, or any art where you're applying these things. I mean, I've started to look at, say, when I look at like interior design with bold colours, right? And you see these really bright coloured chairs in front of walls, and nearly every time they are fifths. So these really good designers are picking fifths. Sometimes thirds, but nearly always fifths, which is really interesting. I think, yeah.
I love this, expanding our world of what color theory is.
Yeah.
And how it's interconnected to everything else. I mean, one thing that I've found in life is that you're interconnected whether you like it or not. If you want to be off in the forest, you are connected to other human beings because you are alive. There's no getting out of it. And these patterns are the same thing.
Yeah, we're built from the same thing. Yeah. I mean, and that's, I suppose, the kind of end of it, really. But, there's some, like, art that I found. What's this one? I'm collecting all, like, pictures. So this Howard Hodgkin, I don't know I think he's a British painter. This was his last ever painting. And it happens to be a fifth.
Right.
I mean, they are two really bold colours. I'd have to go to the exact colour wheel where it was, but I find that fascinating. Sort of picked out the two colours that he used, and that is, it's not that colour wheel; it's a different layer. But I find that fascinating. I mean, it may just be a bit of confirmation bias here, me going in and finding the ones that I know are fits. But same with the interior design here. This beautiful combination. They're reduced, right? But it looks stunning. It's a major triad. It's so that palette it fits with the model. I mean, I just looked at it and struck at me thinking, yeah, that chair goes in front of that wall really well. But yeah, so I'm starting to kind of look at, and it'd be interesting to talk with you at some point about, because you know a lot about movies and their colour, and whether you would to pick your favourite colours in movies, right? And then we just go and analyse what they are on the colour wheel and see if they do match, see if they are fits, see how common those things are used. But there's lots more to figure out with this, but I think it's an interesting start.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to think about. Yeah, taking a movie and saying what musical key would this be?
Yeah.
What would the sound of this image? This color grade. We talk a lot about gamuts and limiting your color space and how to make something really beautiful. You can have realistic light that has all of the frequencies. Yeah. And in the real world, dissonance and harmony are really scientifically the universe doesn't care. You can have something that is just horrid sounding and horrid looking. but it's finding those patterns that will be appealing to us with our pattern recognition and who we who we are as human beings. I find this fascinating. To anywhere we can find inspiration of how to understand this, and even if it's just the fascination, like having this conversation, like it's just fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It makes me think when I go to play the piano, how that relates to color in new ways.
Well, I want, and now if anyone watches this is good at programming, whether they can reach out and code this, right? Just create an app where you can play that piano either through the microphone or MIDI or something, and you can code it and get it to and then you can, in a way of creating a color palette, you could be playing a piano and thinking this sounds nice, and it creates a color palette for you. Well, that'd be fascinating, wouldn't it? Or the other way around.
The other way around.
Yeah.
Exactly. You take an image, and it'll simplify that image down to a key set of what the palette is, and you can hear the sound in equivalent wavelengths. Yeah. I want to hear that. I saw somebody who did a short film where they drove along the highway and saw power lines with birds on it, and then they just played music as if it was, written music, and it was beautiful. Just to hear the combination of the random sounds of birds on wires.
Interesting.
Very fascinating. Well, I mean, I so appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. This is just amazing. Blows my mind, and I'm excited for everyone else who's listening into this conversation too. What are your thoughts on this? And what other information? We're not the absolute authority here. We're not claiming to be. We're just curious people who want to learn and grow and see these beautiful patterns in the world. And if you have links to other things, other ideas, share it with us.
And people can check my maths, and I'm quite happy to be pointed out if there's any glaring error here. But that's interesting, because it's just I ultimately want to find not the truth, because it's complex. It's complex truth, right? It's not. But so definitely.
All right. Well, Ben, again, thank you so much for your time with this.
No, you're welcome.
This is great.